Hello everybody, this is Eli again from Elfbait, and today I wanted to talk to you about genies. Why genies? Well, we're not talking about scantily clad women with top knots, nodding their head and saying yes, master. Though, typically, some of that is involved in the genie mythology. Whether or not it's a blue animated character with the voice of Robin Williams, or the aforementioned 1970s 60s, whatever it is. I watched it when I was a kid. Or whether it's something a little bit more traditional, like the Arabian Nights, or something from one of the Sinbad movies. Genies have a kind of a mixed response in D&D. I think most people, when they talk about D&D genies, first of all, almost everybody thinks of a djinn as the be-all, end-all of the genie. That is the archetypical genie in most people's minds. The wispy, airy genie who comes fluttering out of a bottle. He's got his vest, he's got his shaved head with his top knot, kind of, flimsy little mustache, and, he's got poofy pants, except for where it's air. So there's a lot of Persian imagery in genies, and that's, of course, because that's where they come from. But a lot of that gets mixed into a pretty heavy stereotype, and all of that coalesces into the jinn. Now, the jinn are not the only genie. D&D at its core has 4 different kinds of genies. You've got the aforementioned jinn, which is the genie which is associated with the element of air. You've got the marid, which is a aquatic genie associated with the elemental plane of water. And you've got the dao, which is associated with the elemental plane of earth. And you've got the Efreet, which is the one that everybody should know because he's on the cover of the freaking AD&D DM's guide, along with the back cover, which shows their home, the City of Brass, in brilliant color. So really, that guy is probably most recognized as a D&D form of genie, even though a lot of people may not even know that he's a genie. A lot of people looking at the cover of that book are just going to see big fiery demon guy and a city surrounded by fire. People who know D&D know instantly that that's an Efreet, and that is the City of Brass on the back. But there's still a lot of people who don't understand that an Efreet is a form of genie, and that not all genies are jinn. So that's the basis for genies. Now, why genies? And so genies by and far are like my pick for day 18 of the AD&D 30-day challenge, but they're special enough in my mind to deserve an episode of their own. I was going to do an episode on them anyways. It's a good time. Why? Genies are powerful creatures from the elemental planes. Elementals at their, in the monster manual, in 5th edition monster manual, come in at a challenge rating of 5. The genies, this is interesting too, all genies, regardless of Marid, Jinn, Efreet, or Dao, are all challenge rating 11. So the interesting thing there is that genies become instantly interchangeable based on challenge rating alone. But that's challenge rating 11. So genies are not going to be a good encounter for your party until they're up into tier 2 of play, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not really a fan of the tier system. It's a good quick reference, but hey. Level 7 to 12 is traditionally where I had my most fun playing D&D. But the genies they're not just a bag of wishes waiting to happen. In fact, there's nothing in the default statistics for genies that says that they actually have that they're wish granters. They do have innate spellcasting abilities. Most of those innate spellcasting abilities are spells that relate to their associated element. Marids are going to have water effects, Jinn are going to have air effects, Dao are going to have earth effects, and Efreet are going to have fire effects. Now, the interpretations of these effects are a little bit more interesting in the fact that the Jinn, being air, are often going to have whirlwindy spells, but they're also going to have like lightning spells and misty spells and foggy spells. Dao, being earth elementals, are going to have big crushing spells and effects that affect that. I mean, if I was to pull out my monster manual right now and I will, because I want to give you guys some factual information and not just talk out of my butt. But, so if we pull out Genies, and I should have bookmarked this, but I'm a horrible DM, so sue me. So, we go through the basic Genies. A Dao's spell-like ability, his innate spell abilities are 3 times a day. He can do Pass Wall, Move Earth, and Tongues. And Tongues isn't necessarily an Earth-themed spell, but it is a spell that Genies should have. They're multicultural creatures who interact all over the planes. And this is the other thing that's interesting about Genies, is while they are elemental creatures, they're intelligent elemental creatures who have sort of a courtly presence and are creatures of experience and indulgence and stuff to various degrees. So in addition, at will, they can do Detect Evil and Good, Detect Magic, and Stone Shape. Stone Shape is fitting for an Earth Elemental. Once per day, they can conjure Elemental, Earth Elemental only. They can do Gaseous Form, which I guess in a way is kind of earthy if you consider they might be able to dissolve themselves into particles of dust or something to that effect. Invisibility, maybe not exactly what you would expect for an Earth Elemental, but you would expect it for a Genie. They also have Phantasmal Killer, Plane Shift, and Wall of Stone. Plane Shift isn't perfectly reasonable for an extraplanar being, and a Phantasmal Killer, well, it's in keeping with creatures that are capable of some vengeful crap and might send somebody to go after you and kill you. So, as far as Wall of Stone, well, it's a stone elemental. So, or rock elemental, earth elemental. So, Jin, or Genie, Detect Evil and Good, Detect Magic, and Thunder Wave at will. Thunder Wave, totally air-based spell. If you look at their 3 times a day ability, Create Food and Water, can create wine instead of water, Tongues, and Windwalk. Now this is interesting because Jinn are the wandering genies. They are the most likely to be encountered by players, and as such, they are not, they're also social genies, and so being able to create food and water is in keeping with the theme of that genie. It also makes the Jinn actually excellent patrons, NPC encounters, or threats to be found outside the elemental planes, because they are kind of the wandering genie. Once a day, they can do Conjure Elemental, Air Elemental only, and you'll find that with the genies, for the most part, if they can conjure an elemental, it's automatically associated with their element. Creating, they have creation, which is cool. And that's in keeping with their theme, I think, because in a lot of philosophies, a lot of beliefs, air or breath is associated with creation and life. So that makes sense to me. Gaseous form, well, that's a no-brainer. They are air genies, being able to turn into vapor or just air makes sense. Invisibility, well, of course, that makes sense as well. Major image and plane shift. Plane shift, obviously, because they're planes creatures again. And major image, well, one could say that air and, mirages. So, I mean, that works. Now, Ifrit are brutal. They're big, nasty, sword-wielding nut jobs who want to kill and conquer everything and enslave everything. But their spells, interestingly enough, at will, the only thing they can do at will is detect magic. So, even though they have the same challenge rating of 11 as the other genies, their innate spellcasting abilities are automatically kind of off to a bit of a disadvantage. They can enlarge and reduce, which means that they can become huge or small. Ifrit are great at becoming imposing or actually sneaking around to surprise the crap out of you when suddenly they manifest from this tiny little dude who you think is maybe some sort of little mephit or something. He's maybe dressed as some sort of courtly dwarf, and then suddenly he's towering over you and spitting fire and wants to enslave you. So, really cool image there. And tongues. Tongues, again, seems to be a standard for the genies. And that's cool because they interact with mortals and all sorts of other planar beings. Being able to actually speak across and not have to worry about having gone to school for that is useful. But that's only 3 times per day, so that it's not like that they can just talk with everybody as much as they want. Once a day, they can conjure elemental fire, gaseous form. Gaseous form seems to be a standard for genie, and that is fine because it actually makes perfect sense. Genies are always turning into wisps of smoke and getting away at the last minute, or creeping into your room late at night while you're sleeping in the inn, and then trying to kill you because you've pissed off the local vizier. So, major image, invisibility, plane shift, and wall of fire. So the Ifrit and the Tao both have a distinction of being kind of the battle genies. They are the heavier fighting genies, whereas the Jinn, and now I'm going to get to the fourth genie, which is the genie of water, which is the Marid. They are more the courtly aspects, while the Jinn is social and often, more likely to deal with individuals and go around, associating with people. Jinn, actually, if I recall correctly, they are the ones who have these nice big courts. They actually, are mischievous, but they actually are amenable to serving others. They're, out of all the genies, they're the most likely to actually serve somebody and not try to jack them up and down every time they have a chance to get an advantage. Marids are horrible. Marids are like the opposite. They're out of the social genies. Marids are the ones who actually really treat their people like crap. I mean, they're they slip everybody into categories. They always claim some sort of inflated title. Even if they hold no actual title, they will give themselves a title. And they categorize everybody. Every other genie, every other planar being is somewhere fit into their categorization. The other thing, though, that the one place that Marids stand out, though, is Marids love stories. And that's really kind of cool. So while they're horrible, bestial water guys who look like a big bloated fish and are going to likely, think that you're some sort of, simpering worm, even if you're a 15th level fighter who's defeated everything in the existence, they're still open to hearing a good tale. They love whimsical stories, and you can probably win over a Marid by telling him some sort of tale. And if you're a 15th level fighter who's been around, you've probably got something cool to tell him. So those are the 4 core genie types, and those are the ones that honestly are the most likely to be encountered in most D&D games. They're in the monster manual. They're easily accessible to everybody. So genies don't like to leave their elemental planes often, and they all have various forms of palaces and stuff associated with their particular element. When they're found on the mortal plane, you often are going to find them in specific places. The Ifrit are going to favor hot environments, so your deserts, your volcanoes. Jinn, because the Jinn are kind of the social genies, you're probably going to find Jinn in and amongst people, or fluttering through the desert on the winds, or somewhere, anywhere where they have the element of air is very prevalent. Tao are going to be in the mountains. They're going to be underground. They actually like to make labyrinths and warrens, so it's a good excuse to have dungeons in your world. Even if there's not a Tao in it now, maybe that catacomb of grand tunnels was once the lair to a Tao. Marids, oceans, whether it's a castle at the bottom of the sea or a sea cove or something, that's where you're going to find your Marids. So those are your core genies. Now, thanks to Kobold Press and their resurrection of some of the classic Al-Qadim material for 5th edition, we have this book, this supplement. Now, this is great. This provides 21 new genies for 5th edition. And I'm just going to kind of go over briefly, because this allows you to now start to get into genies at various levels and much more complex interactions. So from the get-go, you now have the Gen. Now the Gen, spelled Jen, are minor genies. They're lesser genies. All the core genies are level 11, or challenge rating 11, and all manifest as some sort of center to a court. That court is going to be made up of other elemental creatures, other elemental beings. Like I could see an Efreet, for example, having an Azer. You know, if he found an Azer who is willing or minded, maybe he has an Azer Smith. You know, making him mighty weapons of renown. You know, a Djinn, while a Djinn might have this court of the air, that court of the air is going to be full of things like there might be Aarakocra there because they're associated with the element of air. Sylphs, you know, remember those from D&D? Those airy, sprightly type creatures. So the Djinn are genies themselves who are at challenge rating 1 across the board. They're all challenge rating 1, and they all appear as kind of like minor versions of the major genie types. And I mean, to that effect, the Earth Djinn, and they all have names that are, you know, very like diminutive versions of their parent, you know, genie type. Air Djinn are known as Jinlings. Earth Djinn are known as Dalinins. Fire Djinn are known as Efreetkin, and Water Djinns are known as Meriden. So they all look like smaller versions of their parent selves. But these things are pretty tough. Even at challenge rating 1, I think the fact that they're challenge rating 1 is only really a manifestation of the fact that they don't do a crap ton of damage, but just pulling the Air Djinn as an example, they've got damage resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical weapons. So basically all the major non-magical weapon types that your party is going to be carrying, they're going to be immune. They're going to be resistant to those. They've got damage immunity to lightning, poison, and thunder. And they've got a conditional immunity to being poisoned. So while they don't dish out a ton of damage, they do have their immunities. They also have an affinity for their element, just like the regular genies do. They have an elemental demise, as something that most of the genies have, is when they die, there's some sort of elemental effect. They do have innate spellcasting. Again, for example, using the Air Genie, or the Air Djinn as an example. They have innate spellcasting ability based on charisma, and they can cast at will plane shift on their self only to the elemental or material planes. It's not a ton, but you know, I mean, that means that they can shift at will back and forth. Now, Djinn are often found as servants, whether that's to genies or mortals. They're very amenable to servants. In fact, their existence is servitude, but in a very general way. They're only challenge rating 1, but that would make a good soldier in the case of like an Efreetkin, having a Efreetkin as your, you know, doorman. If you're some you know, wealthy merchant prince, is going to make perfect sense. You might have, you know, a performer in your garden who is a Water Djinn. She's trickling, she's watery, she's pretty, or he is beautiful in his blue skin. You know, I mean, they come in all shapes and sizes. So those are the four minor Djinn that are created, not genies. The Djinn. There's a lot of names going around. So the Djinn are minor functionary genies, and you're likely going to find them in great numbers in genie layers, and actually acting as agents of mortals. At challenge rating 1, I think they're even getting lowered. They're getting down to the point where you can start having them as familiars or some sort of servant or summoned creature for spellcasters as well. One of the cool things that Kobold Press did in their Genie supplement is they also created a template for a bottled genie. Now, bottled genies are not... It's possible to find all genies in a bottle. The idea behind the bottled genie, though, is that the bottled genie is a genie who's been bottled so long that he's gone nuts. And so with that, they get some extra abilities. Their madness is starting to manifest elementally. It's not even something that they necessarily control. Their presence is maddening because they themselves have gone mad. They also do provide a sample bottled genie in the form of a bottled Djinn. Again, from earlier, the most archetypical thing that we think of when we think of a genie, the wispy air creature that comes out of the bottle. Now, this guy comes in at challenge rating 12, likely a manifestation of the additions from the template that gets applied over the basic Djinn. That makes him pretty potent. Their elemental demise is still there. They now have insanity as an ability. The Djinn has advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened, because they're freaking loony. So there's that. Now there are also, one of the things that I really liked, and I wish I would have had this earlier when my daughter was playing her Genasi character, and we'll get to that in a moment, is they have what I would call simply para-elemental genies. If you remember your old school D&D planar mechanics, you have the elemental planes, and where they touch are these para-elemental realms, or where multiple, maybe not even where they touch, but where different elements come in contact, you have para-elemental realms. So where earth and water come together, you might have mud. Where air and, say, fire come together, you might have heat or something to that effect. So they provide here also 3 what I would call para-elemental genies, and that is the Alnaki, the Kamsiri, and the Neferzi. Now, again, what they're setting up here, though, is not the entirety of genie kind, but what they're really starting to create. And thank you again, Kobold Press, because as a Genie fan, this is great. And I haven't even got to the stuff that they've brought back from Al-Qadim. Some of this may be, but I know the Gen were actually released in earlier versions of D&D, and we'll get to tasked genies in a moment. And those are all from Al-Qadim. But the idea of expanding and the complexity of genies allows for, as a DM, greater opportunities for having genies in the game, but also those planar adventures are not just walking around on a plane of fire fighting fire elementals. You're actually now going to have the option to run into some of these other planar creatures. And the nice thing about genies is wherever you are on the planes, they can show up. Ifrits have armies of devils, just to let you know. The City of Brass has devils and devils living in it. So, Genie is a complex ecosystem. So these para-elemental genies are, we've got the Kamsiri, which is elemental plane of air meets the elemental plane of earth. And they are basically sand, dust devil kind of genies. The Neferzi are from the elemental plane of water, and they are punished. They're punished genies. So while these are not strictly para-elemental, they're actually genies of unique features on that elemental spectrum. The Alnaki are elemental plane of earth, and they are also caretakers of the gardens. They're spirits of the oasis. So here's a great opportunity to create an interesting encounter just off that genie alone. Your party is in the desert. They're dying. They find an oasis. They get there. It's perhaps a genie who's actually living there. He's a caretaker of that. Or maybe they have to find this oasis lair of this genie to get the thing that they want. So just, the genies create nice thematic stories. The Neferzi, they're being punished. They have offended fate. And so they are being punished. And so anything that's been punished is always a source for, good adventure. Then we get on to, so the last kind of actual kind of genie. These are not true genies. The genies themselves actually consider themselves, there's a difference between true genies and like the Gen, and then what we're getting to in the tasked genies. So tasked genies are genies that have been either had themselves transformed from outside by the power of a greater genie, some sort of genie lord, or have put themselves so far into something that they have now become focused. So this is the one thing I really like about genies. While they're elemental creatures, They're thinking elemental creatures, not primordial elemental creatures like an actual true elemental or an elemental lord. These are things with a spirit and a mind and desires and goals, obsessions, betrayals, anything you can think of with humanity factors into them, but they fight and they function elementally at their core. So tasked genies are these genies that have come about due to being heavily invested in something, and there are actually quite a few of them. So we have administrators, we have architects, artists, deceivers, guardians, harem servants, herdsmen, messengers, miners, oath binders, slayers, warmongers, and winemakers. Now, tasked genies vary greatly in challenge rating. The administrator is challenge rating 4. And this is the other thing too about them, they all have an elemental heritage. So this helps to inform the DM what the backbone of this tasked genie is. Because none of them, they all actually take on very odd appearances. Like the winemaker genie has this weird elephant nose, and he's just kind of this weird creature. But like, for example, the administrator genie, they're a djinn. They started out as a djinn. And they're challenge rating 4. Architects are challenge rating 5. And they started out as earth elementals, or earth genies. Excuse me, I'm mixing my terms. Artists, they are. Let's see. Yeah, they're. I'm kind of yammering because I actually haven't had a chance to memorize the new 5th edition. But leave it said. And I really don't want to diminish the video too much. Tasked genies provide an interesting element to the game in that there is now a genie who is connected to a plot device. A artist genie can be the source of a MacGuffin. He can be a source of information. Tasked genies can be an asset to be stolen. Perhaps a Marid sends you off to steal the architect genie who is working for a sultan that he opposes. Perhaps there's a sultan making a great seawall that will keep the ocean out and protect his harbor, and that Marid is angry, and it's all being done by this architect genie. So he sends you, the party, to deal with this architect genie. Now the architect genie is only a challenge 5. So it is very possible that a party, through means of magic or even non-magic, could get a hold of a genie. So tasked genies are not only things to fight, they're actually more so they're elemental NPCs. You're in a marketplace. That artist that you have that freak encounter with could be, in actuality, a tasked genie artist. Now, there are also deceivers, which are genie spies and liars and stuff. They're kind of like the assassins of the genie world. You have the guardians, where guardian is exactly what it says. It is a genie that has been set to guard something. The king's treasury, a tomb, a temple, a holy place in the desert. That guardian is there. Now, that guardian is challenge rating 11. So the guardian tasked genie is up to par with an actual full-powered genie. Deceiver genies are 4, artist genies are 3, architects are 5. So those guys are much more in the realm of high-level NPCs, whereas the guardian genie, that is going to be a badass thing that you have to fight, which you'd expect for a genie. You're going to go out and you're going to find the treasure of the 40 thieves. It might be protected by a guardian genie. That's a challenge rating 11 monster that you now have to fight. Defeat, deceive, whatever. It's a genie, it's got a mind and a personality, and most genies are egotistical bastards to one degree or another. Suck up to a genie, and you're probably going to get far. Unless they figure out that you're sucking up to them, then they're going to get pissed off, and they're going to kill you. Harem servants, level 5. What are they doing? Well, they are actually there to entertain. They can create food, they can create water. Because I know of out of all the task genies, somebody's like, where are you going to use this? Well, environments that are genie heavy, and this is going to be the Al-Qadim setting, it's an Arabian Nights setting. it's a heavy role play environment. If you think about all the Sinbad stories and the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves and all that fun stuff that that we all grew up on, those stories are often as role play heavy as they are combat heavy. So that's why tasked genies were created, I think, is to kind of fill in those roles, to have this air of magic and this elemental spirit everywhere in the game that you went. There are herdsmen tasked genies. Now that means that you have these genies that are out there tending flocks of creatures. Now these could be magical creatures. In some cases they're actually tending the flocks of the genies themselves. Sometimes they're actually tending the flocks of some powerful nobleman or merchant or something. But that's going to be a greater thing. Often what they're protecting is magical livestock, like moon camels. There are messenger genies. This is a genie that is challenge rating 1. A messenger genie is just that. He's going to be that whirlwind that comes in through your window and swirls around on the floor of the courtroom and delivers the message or the threat or the plea for help. There are genie miners. These guys are down there finding all the good stuff deep in the earth. Oath binders. These guys are really cool. These genies are there as actually contractual obligation genies. You make an oath in front of you. This genie is now bound to you to pretty much make sure that you hold to your oath. Slayer genie, and they're challenge rating 6. Slayer genies are actually the most powerful genie I've found in the game, and that is, they're even more powerful than the bottled genie, which was challenge rating 12. A Slayer genie is challenge rating 13. They are assassins. They are sneak attackers. They are combat monsters. These guys are going to be the guy that you send after somebody to kill them. Whereas the Deceiver has some of that. He has sneak attack. His thing is more of courtly intrigue and skullduggery, thievery. The Slayer is what you summon up or who you make the deal with when you want somebody dead. Whether that's in combat or to assassinate them. So the last couple are the Warmonger. The Warmonger is you want to win that war, you make a pact, you make a deal with a Warmonger genie. And that genie will lead your army to victory. Winemaker genies are craftsman genies. And the winemaker and the artist, I really like those two because they open up a wide door for all kinds of other artisanal genies, I guess you can call it. So a winemaker is a challenge rating 1 genie, and he literally just makes wine, fine brew, and all of that. So that's the task genies. Now I know that Kobold Press, in their Elemental Magic supplement, has actually come up with a lot of elemental themed magic options. There's like most of their elemental, most of their what do they call them? Feel bad. The magic supplements to come out from Kobold Press, they're short little small, like 12-page supplements. They come up with some new spells as they can. The elemental one is actually really cool in that it comes up, it has a warlock option, it has a wizard option, and a sorcerer option all in it. So you have an elementalist wizard, you have a warlock who makes a pact with a genie, which is freaking cool because you got a genie pact. I mean, that's just built in with all kinds of roleplay. And genies, being the type of elemental planner creature that likes to have people do stuff for them, are going to be great role-playing for your warlock. It's not like a lot of these patrons where, warlock patrons, where you can really get away with saying that patron's just going to sit back on his laurels. I think all of them have a lot of reasons to have players have their warlocks do stuff, but genies, it's just built into the fabric that they're a bunch of egotistical, me elementals. And then they have an elemental sorcerer in there. So that could be the sorcerer who is either got genie blood somewhere. And then, so the comment on genie blood, that segues into one other aspect of genies I think that I would be remiss in talking about, not talking about, would be the genasi. So half somethings have become, or plain touched, have been a thing since the invention of the tiefling. And I think that's the easiest way to describe the Genasi. Genasi are genie-touched tieflings. You know, you've got tieflings that are abyssal and fiendishly touched. I would love to see some that are actually touched by the Damodons and stuff like that as well. There are Azamar, which are, of course, touched by the outer planes. And then you've got now the Genasi, who are genie-touched. Now, in the Elemental Evil supplement that came out from Wizards of the Coast, you see the 4 Genasi in there. Now, those 4 Genasi are the basics for fire, earth, water, and air. So Genies, Afrits, Marids, and Dao. It'd be interesting to see that expanded to having Genies that are Genasi that are born from other Genies. Though one could argue that Genasi born from other forms of Genies are really just one of those 4, because most of the other Genies are born from those 4. My daughter had wanted to play a Genasi at one point, and we came up with a para-elemental Genasi hybrid. So we took some of the powers from fire and some of the powers from air and combined them into sort of a heat genie. But what if you were a Genasi that was born from, say, a tasked genie? You know, I could see some elemental, some cool plot lines. Now, these lesser genies, or even the gen that are out there, they're not going to be the sort of thing that gets into your blood, your family bloodline way back, and then produces a Genasi. But a challenge rating 5 or challenge rating 4 tasked genie could easily be the direct parent of a Genasi, at least in my opinion as a DM. What if you had a tasked genie artist who was so good at their craft that they then entered into some sort of either relationship or dalliance, or, you know, some sort of, you know, even a marriage, you know, to a mortal, and that produced a Genasi. See, the Genasi are great in that, and because of the variety of genies, thanks to, you know, the core books and now the expansions through Cobalt Press, you have a lot of leeway there. Now, most of those tasked genies began life as something, and even if they don't have a specific genie heritage listed in their stats, you can actually kind of infer that base from what they do. Like an artistic genie, artistic tasked genie who worked in stone may very well have been an earth. It may have originally been created from or developed from a Dao. Whereas a winemaker, well, that winemaker may have very well been a Marid, or maybe that winemaker was actually something more akin to a Djinn. But the point is that you can kind of figure that out. Now, genies in general, now that's the long, it's been what, almost 40 minutes worth of discussion on just what genies are, the kinds of genies out there, how they figure into the cosmology of most gaming worlds, the default D&D setting. So story-wise, how do you use them as a DM? So as a DM, you can use them as just rank adversaries. You're fighting a genie. It's a waste of a genie, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Genies also make great big bads or plot motivators. You can use genies are great also for coming up with plots where you've got one planar creature playing off of another planar creature. Maybe there's an Afrit that is playing off a Djinn, or an Afrit that's playing off of a demon or devil lord. You know, some Baron of Hell is, you know, perhaps, you know, in a rivalry with this Afrit. Maybe that Afrit took this Duke of Hell's, you know, best warrior and recruited him to his task. There are also all sorts of mortal plot lines, whether that's to seek the item that'll control the genie, or to steal away the genie, the tasked genie that's in the service of another lord, getting items from genies, being put to tasks by genies. Genies may just want to sit in their lair and have you do the business for him. The cool thing is, it is completely within the realm of a genie to just pluck a mortal off the prime material and bring him somewhere else. It is instant adventure, because a genie is not going to be the sort of, at least the prime genies are not going to be the sort of thing to care whether the mortal really has a problem with it or not. It's kind of like dragons in that respect. Dragons are, if a dragon is going to recruit you, he may send out feelers and stuff, maybe for the, maybe this is true for the metallic dragons, but if a dragon's going to recruit you, he's just as likely going to fly down and land in front of you and say, you're going to work with me. Or he's going to fly to there, pluck you off the ground, and carry you to a high mountaintop and say, listen, you're not getting off this mountain until you do what I tell you. Genies are the same way. If you're suddenly transported into the underwater gardens and, palace of a Marid, what do? Tell him no and then swim back up to the surface? If you get pulled off the material plane and end up standing in a, in the throne room of a palace in the city of Brass, on the elemental plane of fire, surrounded by devil servants of the Efreet and endless fire and lakes of lava and all that, you're really kind of put in a position. Now that's kind of heavy-handed, but then genies are also manipulative, petty, squabbling creatures. And it's very possible that they might manipulate the party into doing stuff. We mentioned tasked genies. There are all sorts of other, there's specifically tasked genies for killing people. So, what happens when a slayer genie gets sent after the party? That's a mighty foe to have to fight, and I hope that's going to be a high-level game. But could be that the problem is that, a slayer genie has been sent to lay siege to a king's, court, and the party has to come up with a way to stop him. It could also be as simple, though, as maybe a genie is wanting to indirectly check up on one of his progeny. Maybe there's a genasi out there who he's kind of fond of, but being the genie that he is, he can't admit that, or she can't admit, for that matter, that she's really, that they're really wanting to be, that they really care. Maybe that would be seen vulnerable. Maybe they've distanced themselves from the genasi progeny because they don't want that individual to be a pawn in their rivals' schemes. Now, genasi, again, like tieflings, are not supposed to be the direct descendants of demons and devils, or in this case, genies. But as a DM, it's your world. And genies being eternal, so what? They know that this genasi on the earth is their descendant through 5,000 generations or whatever, over the course of this family lineage. But you've got these genies that paint this rich tapestry of intent and purpose. Now, the other thing, too, is there are enough... This is the other last note on a favorite thing for me. There are enough genies in the core monster manual and Kobold Press's genie supplement. I'm also going to mention the fact that there's another genie in the Tome of Beasts, but I don't have his details with me right now. And I think there are 2 more in the 5th edition Foes book that was put out by Frog God, I think, or I may have that wrong. 5th edition Foes, though, good book, but I think there are 2 more genies in there as well. The point being is that the genies are diverse enough to where, as a DM, it should be no problem to create your own. Tasked genies create a wider variety of options and potential, other sub-genie types. Genies are elemental creatures, so certainly it's easy also enough to sub in new abilities. And because they're elemental, other creatures that have elemental abilities you can pluck those powers and apply them to those genies to make them something special. But lesser genies, tasked genies, you can work with these. I have created in the past a genie attorney for a game. There's a tasked genie who was literally a lawyer genie. He It's a genie with a big book. It's chained to him. You know, he just does the lawyer thing. He's there for contracts. He was actually the servant of a merchant. You could do, you know, there are the and there are plenty of the other lesser genies that are challenge rating 1. What if you did genie warriors? What if there was some army of genie kind that was out there that was perhaps summoned up through the wish or a particular deal by a powerful, powerful lord? So you have enough framework there to start plugging and playing and cobbling together and actually really working at creating, if you wanted to, your own genies. There is a wide variety of elemental, fusions that you could work with. The elements themselves are often multifaceted, while earth is certainly very basic, and the dower of the genies of earth. Crystals are also of earth. Gemstones are of earth. Lava is considered earth. And fire. So, I mean, it's that whole para-elemental aspect. So, genies allow for a lot of rich structure. I know in my current campaign setting, there is an entire culture that's got an elemental religion base. It's sort of pulled, at least in its core structure, from Al-Qadim and memories of Al-Qadim. The funny thing is, when I was creating this for my current campaign, I created it off the fly, off the cuff, mixing my metaphors again. And then later on realized that that's how they did it in Al-Qadim. I remember I was going through some old Al-Qadim stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, so that's stuck in my head. But, it's really, genies are that, I think they're undersold as adversaries, as NPCs, as sources of adventure, as elements of background. Magic items can be made by genies. Dungeons and fortresses and temples can be left behind by genies. They can be guarded by genies. They can be built by genies. They can be created by genies. Empires can have risen and fallen based on genies. And genies, unlike actual elementals, want to get their hands mixed in other people's business, because genies think that they're everything. The genies think that they are the coolest, most important thing in the cosmos. Demons interfere because demons are evil, but genies interfere because they like the color of your shirt. So, hope you've enjoyed my long ramble on about genies. I find them to be an incredibly inspiring monster for D&D. I hope more is done for them. There is the new Creature Codex coming out from Kobold Press, and I'm crossing my fingers that we will see some more genies in there, because I love them. Genies are fun to play with. So, like, share, and subscribe, but more importantly, getting the word out for the channel is great, but more importantly, I love hearing the discussion and the conversation about what I talk about. Getting some more comments, since we, especially more now that we've started getting some more people coming through. Thanks again to the folks at Nerdarchy for that, and all you guys who actually came over after watching my appearance over there. It's still fresh in my head, and it was really a cool opportunity. Dave, Ted, and Nate, those guys are the heart and soul of that show right now. Ryan, who has moved on to other stuff, great guy, but they do a great job, and so certainly I appreciate the extra traffic I got through them. So I'm hoping that my content will certainly be worthy of your extra attention, but really, not to sell it too hard, just talk. I put these videos out because I saw that there were a lot of new people out in the hobby, and I figured I had a lot to say based on my long time as a D&D player. And I'm not always right. My ideas may not be the best ideas for you. Certainly like to hear yours. So share them below. Like, share, and subscribe. But most importantly, get out and game.